and welcome. I'm Michelle Marchant Johnson with Love Life Coaching, and I'm so thrilled and honored today to welcome a wonderful guest. And I know we're going to have a conversation that will be so beneficial to so many of you out there. And that is the lovely Susyn Reeve. Welcome, Susyn.
Hi, it's great to be here with you, Michelle. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Oh, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited about this because I've been aware of your work for some time and have really wanted this opportunity to connect with you personally and really share your wisdom. And I think that it's going to be really important for this audience because, as I mentioned to you, a lot of the women in this audience have lived long enough to have their hearts broken a time or two, to have been out there and had some of the ups and downs and hit a few potholes and speed bumps in their love lives, and need perhaps some tools for healing so that they can live their best and most happiest lives.
Great. Well, I certainly fit into that category.
Yeah, I understand. Me too. So just a little bit about Susyn before we get underway with what I know is going to be a great conversation. Susyn Reeve's life has been informed by a question written in her journal when she was 14 years old. What would the world be like if everyone loved themselves? First of all, Susyn, I love that you were that deep of a thinker at age 14. That's fantastic. While she has been creative much of her life, painting and creating art journals are new creative expressions that have ignited her passion and delight. And you know what, Susyn, that's also something I talk a lot about to my audience, is really tapping into their passions and doing things even for nothing else other than for creative expression and for joy. You know, even if we're not particularly good at it, which I know you are.
Well, I wasn't until very recently. Painting is something that I didn't even think that stick figures that I drew were good. So I am a major proponent of allowing our creativity to flow.
Yeah, absolutely. Susyn is a master heart healing coach with a wealth of experience as a corporate consultant and executive coach, self-esteem expert, interfaith minister, and award-winning author. Her books include Heart Healing, The Power of Forgiveness to Heal a Broken Heart, and that's actually the book we're going to highlight most of all in this particular conversation, although you're certainly welcome to bring in things from other sources, Susyn. The Wholehearted Life, Big Changes and Greater Happiness Week by Week, and The Inspired Mind, Unleashing Your Mind's Capacity for Joy. Susyn is honored to be on the advisory board of Creative Spirit, Marblehead, Massachusetts. So welcome once again, Susyn.
It's great to be here.
So happy to have you here. And I'm really excited about what you have to share. And I wonder if we can just start by you giving us some context and background in terms of your own personal journey and your own personal experiences and how it led you into writing these books and doing this work that you now do.
Yeah, well, one of the things that you mentioned in introducing me is the question that I wrote in my journal when I was 14 years old. And what I didn't know at the time is those were really my marching orders for life. But I'm going to go back to when I was a bit younger. Because, and let me say, I'm from an extremely loving family, and I don't have a horrendous story of abuse. Yet it's the littlest things in our life that can cause, seeming little things that can cause trauma. And when I was 3 years old, my mom went into the hospital. And at that time, in the early 50s, when you went into the hospital for surgery, you could easily be there for a few weeks. My sisters were a lot older. My dad worked all day long. And my parents, as a loving decision, decided that it would be best if I stayed with my grandparents, who adored me. And so the day of the surgery, my grandfather came. We drove my mother to this enormous hospital in New York, in Manhattan, where I lived. And my grandfather and I left my mother there crying. And he was taking me to his house where I'd been many times before. My grandmother was awaiting me, but I'd never been away from my family before. And so I internalized that as there was something wrong with me. You know, I certainly didn't have the language for that at the time, but that experience of being cast out. And that experience has repeated in my relationships until I could truly forgive and heal the past. And so in the decision that I made that I wasn't loved and there was something wrong with me, and that's why I was the one who had to be sent away, even though it was for a short period of time with people who loved me, my heart closed because of that. And my capacity to truly believe that others loved me, and I've been married and divorced twice and have been in other loving relationships, my capacity to truly receive and to give love for the longest time had been blocked because there was a place in me that I didn't believe that I was ever truly loved. You know, and this is, you know, this is the trauma of a child, of something happens where, you know, it could certainly be horrific abuse. And it could also be being compared to a sibling. Why aren't you more like your sister? Why aren't you more like your brother? And we take that to mean I'm not okay. Mm-hmm. And then in relationships, what do? We project on our partners what we don't love about ourselves. I know I convinced my first husband that I was fat, and I wasn't, because that's all I talked about all the time. Yes, I did talk about other things, but that I was too fat. And after a while, he might say to me, and a while might be a few years, he might say, yeah, you know, you looked better in that than you look in this. And I take that on as evidence and proof that there was something wrong with me. But the real job, ultimately, was forgiving myself for believing that I wasn't loving, that I wasn't loved, and that I didn't deserve love.
Mm-hmm. This is so profound, because I think one of the biggest blocks and obstacles to having the love that we desire in life for so many of us is this feeling of, on some level, that we're unlovable, or that we're unworthy of love, or that we haven't been loved, and that we can't be loved. And it's an insidious kind of thing, because sometimes it's kind of operating underneath the surface, and we sometimes don't even realize that it's there. And I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Marissa Peer. Are you familiar with her work? So she's a British woman who has worked with a lot of celebrities, as well as just, you know, everyday normal people in their lives. And she believes that the core of almost every addiction or every block to love, or oftentimes overeating or overspending or other problems that we create for ourselves, is this feeling of this feeling of unworthiness, and not believing that we're enough in some way. And so,
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah,
I'm really a proponent of that. I describe it as our relationship with ourselves forms the blueprint for all the relationships in our life. Mm-hmm. So that to the degree that I love myself is the degree to which I can not only give, but I can also receive. And I've come to believe that the capacity to receive love is crucial for a relationship to continue to flourish. Otherwise, it's a repeat of the same old argument every single time there's an argument. And underneath it all is that we don't believe that we're loved. And now we have the argument that's more evidence. See, he or she doesn't treat me the way I want to be treated? Or why doesn't he or she understand me? And since I'm at the verge of beginning to date again, after moving through the heartbreak, which heart healing describes, is what's so clear to me is one of the qualities, one of the ways of being that I'm looking for in a partner is someone who loves himself. Not in a narcissistic way, but somebody who loves himself and is able to receive the love of another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if we don't have the capacity, an expanded capacity to receive, and we want this amazing, beautiful love, it's like trying to pour a gallon of water into a 1-cup container. It's not, we don't have the container to hold that. We don't have the space to hold that. And I find that for most women, our skills at giving are pretty expansive. We've got that pretty well developed. Our ability to receive oftentimes is blocked or limited.
And for me, there's the what I used to believe, and pretty much until I was in my 50s and started exploring that, so that was about 20 years ago, is that if I was needed, it meant that I was loved. And an example of that in my life is my second husband had 4 kids when we met and when we married. And I can remember early on, before we were married, I asked each one of them one day when I was making lunch, what do you want? And they all wanted something else. And so I made something else for each one of them. And I set the pattern of, you can count on me to give you what you want, which had sometimes made a lot more work for me and wasn't always necessary. But the confusion of, if you need me, then you'll love me. Love is different than need.
Yeah, I'd love for you to say a little bit more about that, because I do think that is something that can get kind of muddied for people. The feeling of being needed is equated with the feeling of being loved.
Well, I think that in relationships, and this has been my experience in being a woman and working with probably thousands of women, and I know it's also true of some men as well, this overgiving. And the overgiving is underneath that. For me, it was, then you'll see that you need me and how I make your life so much better and so much easier. I make the sandwich that you want. I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg of, and women in general are very good at seeing what someone else needs and also not good at asking for what we need. So that constant over-giving, because then I will have gotten the right combination and you'll love me. But the love isn't about that I do X, Y, and Z for you, although it's wonderful to have someone be helpful and do things for us. I certainly like that. If the giving is attached to, now you'll need me so you'll love me, then I constantly have to do more and more giving. And what happens is I often don't put my oxygen mask on first from that point of view. So then I get depleted. I mean, this was my pattern. And then I would have an argument with my partner. I do this, that, suddenly my memory was absolutely perfect, and I could name everything since the moment we met that you didn't do, but I did do for you. And that rehashing of the past, that keeping score, really doesn't help. The giving that has no strings attached, that isn't calculating how I'm now going to manipulate you so I can get what I want. But it's an open-hearted giving that includes sometimes saying, no, I'm not able to do that right now. Or no, please ask someone else. And, as women, we often overgive and we don't set boundaries. We don't say no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's so much that we could talk about in terms of this overgiving. That is definitely a pattern that shows up so much in so many women's lives, either trying to earn a man's love or show how irreplaceable we might be in his life, and thinking that's going to flip him to recognize that we're that person he wants to be with, or being in a relationship and feeling like we've constantly got to be doing things to prove our worth, to prove our value, to prove that we're lovable and worthwhile to have around. And you're right, it over a period of time, if that goes on without a woman tuning into her own needs and to her own energy, and her also expanding her capacity to receive, then she's likely going to experience some burnout or some resentment, or like you described, you finally just kind of blew up with your partner, because this is probably, you're just depleted. You've got nothing left and you're probably getting nothing back. And everybody's thinking, well, what's wrong with her? This is what she's always done, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's definitely a pattern. I know in one of my relationships, I was constantly giving. I mean, I was so generous with this man, but my belief was that he would begin to realize how irreplaceable I was in his life, and that he would love me more and want to be with me. Of course, this never happened, right?
Yeah, and when we're not authentic about who we are, then who is the person actually loving? This persona that we're presenting ourselves to be, rather than, a fully multidimensional person.
Yeah, that's such a good point. That's such a good point. I mean, if we're not even allowing someone to see our authentic, real self, who is it that they're loving? If it's this version of ourselves that we think we need to be in order to get love.
I want to say something simply because it's popping into my mind right now. And that is, in the relationship that I wrote about in Heart Healing, it was a very different relationship for me. And it was different because I was able to receive love. I felt so loved in the relationship. And that's when it became clear to me, here's what goes on in a love relationship. Because it's about love, love will bump up against those places in us where we don't love ourselves, where we don't think that we're worthy. And so love, a relationship, is a healing place for us to explore those old wounds and ideally evolve our relationship with the wounded parts of ourselves, so that I'm no longer carrying around, well, when I was 3 years old, my parents sent me to my grandparents for 3 weeks and I felt abandoned. I mean, for that story to continue to run my life, it's really my problem at that point. And so our willingness to, in a love relationship, when we feel wounded, rather than our focus being on blaming the other for what he or she did to us, rather to ask ourselves, what am I believing right now that's having the sentence he just said to me cause such deep pain? Mm-hmm. And so that pain is an opportunity to explore the wounds and the constriction to love within myself. Mm-hmm. Not always easy, not always comfortable. And while my last beau may have a different take on what was the flaw that led to the end of that relationship, for me, it's that the love bumped up against those wounded places. And as he said to me very directly, I don't want to go there. I don't want to feel these feelings.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I think that there's so much there in what you said. I think that love bumping up against those wounded places and us asking that question you said, what is it that I'm believing that is creating this strong response? If we notice a strong response or something like that in a relationship, because I think all of us carry wounds from childhood, no matter how loving, no matter how dysfunctional, no matter what was going on in our family of origin, I think we all carry a certain point of view, beliefs, set of beliefs and experiences that influence us. And like we talked about, it's a little tricky because sometimes we don't even know that that's going on. It's like the hard drive in a computer. We might not see it. It's running the whole show sometimes.
And, I'd love to share an exercise with that question that can be used.
Okay, that's wonderful.
So whenever one is triggered by a wound, whatever that so-called negative feeling is, which is simply energy, is to, and this is a written exercise, write down when I am feeling and write the emotional name of the feeling, anger, sadness, hurt, rage, desperation, whatever the word might be, as well as the physical experience, the physical sensation, tightness in my heart, clenching my stomach, headache, because our body gives us clues right away. So when I am feeling, and you write down the emotion and the physical sensation I am believing about myself, about my partner or other, about relationships, about love, about life. And look at those beliefs with no judgment about them. Rather, the curiosity of, do these beliefs support the kind of relationship I desire, both with myself and with another? And if not, what would be a new program? What would be some new beliefs? Not that we're necessarily going to install those new ones at the snap of our finger, but this awareness of our beliefs is the starting point to upgrade the software of our mind, aligned to the woman, to the man who we are today.
I love that exercise. I think that is incredibly powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
You're welcome.
I think that would be very, very helpful. And I can see so many applications for that, where that could be used in so many different ways. So thank you so much for sharing that.
You're very welcome.
I also think sometimes getting things out on paper, like if you're talking about this being a writing exercise, I think that helps bring that up into the surface where we can actually look at it and address it in a different way than if it's just kind of bubbling up underneath and we can't quite define what's going on. So I think that's powerful.
Yeah, and one of the things that I find so interesting about writing is you can also spell write, R-I-G-H-T. So allowing those feelings, those thoughts to move out of us, we're already doing an intervention. And for some who the idea of writing is, it's the last thing I want to do. Well, you can talk to a stuffed animal, you can talk to your pet, or talk to a trusted friend who will not pour gasoline on the fire of this emotional experience, who is bearing witness, who isn't giving you all their opinions or analyzing your partner. So now you understand his or her psychology, but you really haven't gotten to the root of what's going on. What is it in me that's having what this other person said or didn't say, did or didn't do, trigger such a strong response? And I truly believe that when the response is really strong, unless it's a horrific circumstance happening in the moment, but when the response is really strong, it's carrying energy of unresolved traumas, and wounds
Mm-hmm.
that are calling, that are yelling, pay attention to me. It's
Right.
time to heal.
Yeah, it's time to heal. So speaking of healing, I want to make sure we get a little piece in here specifically around the concept of forgiveness, because as I shared with you, Susyn, before we started, I've always been kind of fascinated with the concept of forgiveness, with the power of forgiveness, with how important I think forgiveness is. And I often think that the most challenging part of forgiveness in so many situations is forgiving ourselves. But I
Yes.
just wonder if you can share some of your thoughts generally on forgiveness and maybe give us some ideas or tools on how to work with, a broken heart or a disappointment or a relationship that ended badly, where there's still some pain and kind of an open wound there, and what we kind of do with that, because I know there are women in this audience that are in that, experiencing that even as we speak.
So I'm going to tell a brief story. And so I was married pretty soon out of college to my college sweetheart. And we were together for 8 years and then we divorced. For me, I was in my late 20s then. It was the worst thing that could have ever happened. It was proof that no one would ever love me again and that he really didn't love me. After we had been divorced for about 2, maybe 3 years, I had gone to a workshop on forgiveness. And briefly, we did a visualization. Close your eyes and there's a door off to the right. Somebody's going to walk through the door. Forgive that person. And so I follow the instructions of the guided visualization. My eyes are closed and I see my former husband standing in front of me, and now I'm going to forgive him. And in my head, the words that I'm saying to him are, I forgive you for having an affair. I forgive you for not being available when my dad was dying. And I heard another voice, and it came from my heart. And this is what I heard: I forgive you for loving me. And it was so powerful. And I opened my eyes and I thought, whoa, something really important has come up. If I didn't love me, how could I receive his love? Now, an interesting thing about this is for the previous year, I had been asking him to send home movies that we had made when we had been together. And he refused a number of times. And I thought, this guy really has a problem. About 10 days after that visualization, I was in New Hampshire where we had lived together in a giant supermarket. And suddenly I knew he was in the supermarket. And I walked up and down the aisles and I found him. We said hello. And then he said to me, did you receive the movies? And I said, no, I've been in New Hampshire for the holidays on vacation. And he said, I sent them to you about 10 days ago. I mean, to me, that's the power of forgiveness. And what was that? It was really forgiving myself for me not loving me. And so it's really important to be clear. We forgive for ourselves, and we are forgiving our attachment to a particular story that has us be victimized by the circumstances of that story. I think it's really crucial to really know that at every single moment, each one of us is doing the very, very best we can based upon whatever programming is running us, whether we're conscious of it or not. And so every one of us is doing the best we can at every moment. And I like to think, one of the ways I think about forgiving is I think about the word forgive as 2 words. What am I forgiving? And if I hold on to resentment and anger, a sense of victimization because of somebody else's action or inaction, then I am constantly giving to myself whenever I think about that person the feeling of resentment and anger. And is that fair for us to do to ourselves? So that's in a way, that's a selfish way to think about forgiveness. I don't want to harm my body and my mind and my heart with these negative emotions going through me. And I find it's another writing exercise. And start writing, I forgive you for. And the you can be yourself, I forgive me for. And just write it down, get it out, whatever it is. And the benefit I've had, and you may have had this experience as well because of the work you do, Michelle, you've heard enough people's stories of their wounds and the sense of betrayal and victimization and anger, that we truly know that while so often we don't want to share that, because if somebody knew that about me, then they really wouldn't love me. Yet that willingness to be vulnerable and to share the shame and the wound in a way dissolves it. And so in forgiveness, it is again that initial writing exercise that I mentioned. When you notice you're feeling resentful or this sense of betrayal because what she did to you or what he did to you, he or she was doing the best they could. That does not condone the behavior, but it returns the attention to what is going on in me, that I am still holding on to that anger, that I in some way believe that holding on to this is a protection for me. Because what it really does is it closes our heart to love.
Mm-hmm.
So did that address some of what you asked?
Yeah, and in fact, I was very, very moved by your story and what you said. I mean, when you talked about that part where you were forgiving this ex-husband and the piece came up for you, I forgive you for loving me, and how that created this opening. I mean, somehow he energetically felt and experienced that forgiveness.
Yes.
And started sending the videos. And I just think it's so powerful. And the reminder of what you said also about, what do you want to give? What do you want to give if you break that apart? Forgiveness, and what do you want to give to yourself? And when we're holding on to things, we're giving ourselves those negative emotions, those negative feelings. And I'm also a believer in what you said too, just to put the explanation point on this too, Susan, is I do believe that we're all doing the best that we can with what we have to work with in any given moment. And when we start seeing ourselves and others through that lens, we can have a lot more compassion. We can have a lot more compassion for ourselves and for other people in our lives. And wow, does that create an opening?
Yes, then it's safe for us to have our hearts open. It's interesting to me that during the breakup that I write about in Heart Healing, that I kept my heart open during that first year. It's been 2 years now since that breakup. During that, really, the first year and a half, I kept my heart open. I felt the feelings I felt. I was angry some of the time, and that went into my journal. I was initially angry with him breaking up with me via an email. We're in our 60s, and that's how he's breaking up. And my heart closed earlier this year when I thought, okay, time to date again. I mean, it was so interesting to me. Then I don't want to be hurt again. I don't want this to happen again. Is it safe for me to love again? It's just so interesting. And that feeling lasted for about 3 months until I started painting and discovered a creative outlet. And I know that I'm a creative person, but painting was never part of it for me. Discovering and engaging in a creative outlet that I have been so delighted that what I can describe it to, what I've told some friends is, when I paint, I feel the same love that I felt when I last fell in love, which says to me, okay, you're ready.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. That's great. You found a channel to bring that forward. And I do think that it's really important for women to connect with things like that, whatever it is for a woman to connect with a creative outlet, a channel that brings her joy, a hobby, spending time in nature, wonderful self-care, whatever makes her feel good, because it does kind of open us up in different ways. And I think it's beautiful that you found that outlet or channel for yourself. And it changes throughout our lives too.
Absolutely. I mean, again, if somebody had said to me as recently as 6 months ago, you are going to be a painter and people are going to like your work, and there are some people who are going to want to buy your work, I would have thought, I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe if I did the needle points that I create, maybe if I do some other art projects, craft projects that I've done, but I never would have thought this would have been it. But that feeling of love lets me, interestingly enough, in terms of dating, what it has done is that if I'm in touch with someone online, or even if I go out on a first date with someone and don't hear back from them, I'm not experiencing a major breakup, which was what had gone. When I started online dating years ago, before I was in a relationship, and I've been in 2 wonderful relationships over the past 6 years with men who I met online. And if someone I hadn't even met didn't write back to me, I would be going through a breakup. Now, that says much less about that man than it does about my almost desperation of wanting some man to come and rescue me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm so glad you said that too, for a couple of reasons. First of all, you said you've been in wonderful relationships with men you've met online in your 60s. I want the ladies out there that are in their 60s and beyond to be hearing that. And
Yes.
also this piece about taking things really personally from these people that don't even know you. They're complete strangers. They may not even be real online, is a phenomenon that happens so often. And I'm just so glad you brought that up, because like you're saying, this is an opportunity to explore, what is the story behind that? That if someone I haven't even met, that is a total stranger, that may not even be real, doesn't write me back, and I experience that as a breakup, what is going on underneath the surface? What is the story? What is the belief underneath that would make me have that as an experience in something that really is so benign?
Exactly. I mean, I have to say, I am a child of the 50s, and these are the beliefs that I had when I married at age 22. Men know everything, and now all my problems will be solved.
Oh.
I mean, what pressure to put on a man, but I truly believed that from TV, from movies, from romance novels, from this idealized version of, once I got married, all my problems would be solved. And I can remember standing in front of the freezer. We were in graduate school in Ohio. We had gone to a butcher school and brought all this meat home. And he was doing something outside, and I said, okay, I'll put everything away. And I was putting this meat into the freezer, and my thought was, now this is going to be my job forever. Whereas before we were actually married and living together, it was fine with me that he did those things along with me, and he did continue to do them along with me. But that's how ingrained this role of what it means to be a good wife was.
Mm.
When I was actually very independent, I was outspoken, I took a lot of risks in my life. But in terms of relationships, I knew nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and it's like, for some people, it seems like the whole process of getting into and staying in a healthy, good relationship appears fairly natural. For so many of us, though, it's not. And it's almost like being expected to know a foreign language without ever being taught a foreign language. I mean, I know for me, yes, it can be a source of healing a relationship. It's also one of the biggest sources of growth because, like you said, it does bump up against those areas that we might not have seen or acknowledged or even knew were there. It's like we look in the mirror every day, we think we see ourselves clearly. We're not necessarily seeing the side view or, heaven forbid, the rear view, right? But a relationship shines that, it's like that mirror that shines all the way around, and we go, whoa, didn't know that was there, or where did that come from? So it's a great opportunity for self-awareness and growth as well as healing.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. So I want to kind of end on something that you said early on in our conversation. And then I want to just give everyone a little bit more detail on how they can find out about your books and where they can connect with you if they would like to online. So Susyn, one thing that you said, and I'm paraphrasing here, is you said something like, and help me out, like, we cannot love someone, or we cannot be loved more by someone else than we love ourselves. I'm paraphrasing. Mm-hmm. Can you help me out here? Because I want to kind of end on this note.
Yeah, it's that our relationship with ourselves, the degree to which we accept and love and forgive ourselves for past whatever, beliefs, indiscretions, oh, I wish I hadn't, that to the degree that we accept and love ourselves is the degree to which we can receive love from others. The degree to which we can accept and have compassion for others, and ultimately not take things personally, and to be curious about exploring. There's a book about the 5 love languages. Mm-hmm. Be curious to explore, what does love look like for my partner, and what does it look like for me? What makes the difference? And to be willing to explore that, and to have the courage when we feel our heart broken, to really go inside and explore, what is it that I'm believing about myself, about love, that is causing this heartache? Because a broken heart, it's important to remember, when a heart is broken, that still allows our love to flow out and the love of others to flow in. The real danger is when our heart is closed and we're armored up and we put on a mask and we think we're acting and being who someone would love. It's being ourselves in our full authenticity and loving ourselves that requires nourishment on a daily basis. But that's what makes the difference in our lives.
Thank you. Thank you. That was really beautiful. And that's a really beautiful way for us to wrap up. And it relates to your question that you asked as a 14-year-old girl, which was just to remind everybody, what would the world be like if everyone loved themselves? So we've kind of gone full circle here.
Yay.
Yay. So Susyn, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom so generously. I really appreciate it, and it's so lovely to connect with you, and I know this will be a blessing for many people. So I do want to let people know about where they can get your books and how they can connect with you, and we'll put links underneath this video or audio that you're watching or listening from. But do you have anything you'd like to share with us about your books or your website or anything in terms of people connecting with you, Susyn?
Yeah, well, my website is a great way to connect with me. You can email me through my website. It's my name. Michelle is going to have the link to the website because my name is spelled in an unusual way, SUSYNREEVE.com. The books you can find online at my website, at Amazon, at Barnes & Noble. And if you're the supporter of local independent bookstores, your bookstore may not have my book or my books, but you can ask the people working in the bookstore to order the book. It's available through the distributor.
Thank you so much, Susyn. And yeah, we will have the links right below the video and audio. And I really have appreciated so much interviewing. Thank you again for being so generous. And ladies, I know you're going to want to listen to this interview maybe more than once and experiment with Susyn's exercises and check out her books. So thank you so much, Susyn, and thanks everybody for joining us. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you, Michelle. Bye-bye.